In a cramped rescue shelter on the outskirts of Asheville, sound crashed together like a chaotic symphony. Hundreds of dogs barked, tails slamming against iron bars, eyes burning with the hope of a second chance. Children giggled, pointing at the liveliest ones. Parents nodded, promising, "Maybe we'll take this one." Footsteps echoed, food trays clattered, kennel doors swung open and slammed shut, noise layered on noise, until it was almost suffocating. But in the farthest corner, where the fluorescent light barely reached and no one cared to look, sat a different kind of being. A Doberman puppy, no more than 3 or 4 months old, curled into a ball inside a rusted steel cage. He didn't bark. He didn't press against the bars. He didn't wag his tail like the others. His black and tan coat was patchy, matted with grime and damp. His ribs showed sharp beneath skin stretched too thin. His ears drooped, his head hung low, and his body was trembling with each shallow breath. And in his brown eyes, glassy, rimmed with tears, flickered a sorrow words could not hold. He was too tired, too broken to beg for affection anymore. People walked past, sparing a glance before turning away, whispering, "That's the saddest dog here." To most, he was invisible. A puppy that didn't smile, didn't wag, a dog no one believed would ever be chosen. I hadn't come to find a dog that day. After Rusty, my companion of more than 10 years, passed, the brick house on the edge of the Asheville woods fell into silence. Every night, I still saw his old collar hanging on the wall, still heard phantom nails clicking across the hardwood, only to be met by emptiness. The thought of replacing him felt unbearable. I had only come to the shelter to look, to donate some food, to be reminded that life still moved somewhere. Yet in that shadowed corner, I stopped. I don't know why I knelt, why I slid my hand through the bars just to let it rest there. I expected nothing, no reaction. But what happened made my throat tighten. The Doberman lifted his head slowly, eyes still wet, as if asking instead of answering. "Would anyone ever want me?" Then, with a trembling motion, he raised his tiny paw and placed it gently against my hand. The touch was feather-light, but it carried the weight of a plea. I swallowed hard, heart twisting. In an instant, memories of Rusty came rushing back. How, when I was exhausted, he'd lay his paw across my knee, silent comfort in a language only we shared. Now, another paw, frail and shaking, but this one asking not for comfort, but for the chance to live. "You care about her?" A voice rose behind me. I turned. A middle-aged woman in a staff uniform, name tag reading Maya. Her gaze on the pup was warm but tired. "She's been here almost 3 months. We found her in a cardboard box at the gate one freezing morning. She survived, but she's never been the same. Doesn't fight for food, doesn't cry out, doesn't wag her tail. Children shy away from that quiet stare. Adults want instant joy. So, no one picks her." I looked down, felt the small paw trembling still in my palm, as though afraid I'd pull away. Maya's voice lowered, nearly a whisper. "She doesn't eat well. Sometimes she skips meals for days. She's not aggressive, just shut down. And if she ever got adopted only to be returned, I don't think she'd survive it." Her words sank heavy as lead. And yet, something inside me rose, certain, unshakable. I heard my own voice, low, steady. "I want to fill out the paperwork." Maya studied me for a long time, weighing impulse against conviction. Finally, she nodded and led me to the office. Beneath pale yellow light, I wrote my name, Aaron Miller, across the pages. Each stroke of the pen carved a silent vow. I would not turn away from those eyes the way so many others had. When Maya lifted the pup from the cage, her body went rigid, eyes wild with fear. I reached out. She was weightless in my arms, cold and fragile, so fragile I feared even breathing too hard might break her. I held her close, whispered, "Welcome home. From today on, you won't be invisible." Outside, Asheville rain drifted down, headlights slicing the dark in cold streaks. But inside me, a small flame had been lit, weak but real. And I didn't yet know that, from the moment her trembling paw touched my hand, both our lives had already begun to change forever. I drove back to the quiet red brick house at the edge of the Asheville woods, heart restless, tangled with worry. In the back seat, Shadow curled under a blanket, her wide eyes fixed on me through the rearview mirror. There was no excitement, only wariness, only the trembling of a creature who still didn't believe she was truly going home. When I opened the door, the scent of dry pine wood and old black tea rushed out. I had set up a small bed by the fireplace, a bowl of clear water, and wet food mixed with chicken. I placed Shadow gently on the wooden floor, careful to move slowly. But instantly she crawled into the corner, pressing her body so tight against the wall it was as if she wanted to vanish into the dark. I knelt, keeping distance, palm flat against the floor. "It's all right, Shadow," I whispered. My voice fell thin inside the empty room. She didn't stir, didn't whine, didn't resist. She only looked at me with those deep brown eyes, a gaze that cut straight through my chest. Night settled. I sat on the sofa pretending to read, but every second my eyes followed her small shape curled in the corner. The hum of the fridge was enough to startle her. The rattle of the porch door in the wind sent her ears folding back, her whole body shaking. I realized Shadow wasn't just afraid of this place. She was afraid of the memories she carried here. All evening, the food remained untouched. The water is still full. She never left the corner. I didn't push, didn't pull. Maya's words from the shelter echoed, "If she's ever sent back again, she won't survive it." Remembering that, I chose patience. Near midnight, as the clock ticked in the dark, I caught the faintest movement. Shadow crept forward inch by inch, claws scratching the wood like a needle dragging across vinyl. She wasn't heading for the food bowl. She was heading for me. My heart raced, but I forced myself still. Just a few steps away, she stopped, lowered her head, and, suddenly, rested her tiny chin on the tip of my shoe. The touch was so light I could hardly feel it, yet it carried the weight of everything she couldn't say. My throat closed tight. I barely breathed, afraid any sound would send her retreating. I lowered my hand to the floor, not touching her, only letting my warmth be near. Seconds passed, then minutes. Shadow stayed there, chin pressed to my shoe, eyes drifting shut as if she'd found, at last, a sliver of safety. "You're brave," I whispered. "Here, no one will leave you again." That first night, I didn't sleep. I sat and watched her breathing steadily, her tiny chest rising and falling. She wasn't shaking anymore. That alone felt like a miracle. The next morning, sunlight cut through the curtains, painting gold across the wood. I slid the food bowl closer. Shadow opened her eyes, stared, then turned away. Hunger hadn't yet defeated fear. I sighed, crouched down, and lifted a small piece toward her. "No rush," I murmured, voice soft as if coaxing a child. She didn't take it, only sniffed, then edged back into the corner. The hours moved slowly. I walked through the house, letting familiar sounds ripple without suddenness. Shadow tracked my every step, eyes wide, but she no longer bolted. By nightfall, when I settled on the sofa, she crept out again. This time, not only resting her chin on my shoe, but inching closer until she lay pressed against my leg. I let my fingers graze her back, brushing the rough black and tan fur. Shadow flinched but didn't flee. She only let out a long breath, as though laying down a burden too heavy for her small chest. I smiled, tears running warm down my face. Welcome home, Shadow. By the third day of having Shadow home, I began to fear she might waste away before finding any reason to keep living. The food bowl in the corner was always missing just a bite or two. The water dish stayed full, as if untouched. Each evening, when I came back from work, I found her in the same spot, curled tight, those wide eyes fixed on me with the same guarded suspicion. But that morning, sunlight slipped through the curtains, falling straight onto where she lay. I sat down and placed a small piece of boiled chicken in front of her. "Here, Shadow," I whispered, my voice almost trembling. "Just try a little." She looked at the chicken, then at me. Silence, stretched. Slowly, her small nose leaned forward to sniff. A trembling step carried her half an inch closer. And then, the chicken vanished in her mouth so quickly I almost doubted I'd seen it. I held my breath, waiting for what came next. Shadow froze, swallowed, then, unexpectedly, licked her lips. A second later, her head dipped toward the food bowl. The faint crunch of her chewing broke the stillness. Quiet, fragile. Yet to me, it was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. I sat motionless, tears stinging my eyes. "Good girl, Shadow. You're stronger than you think." That afternoon, I tried something else. In the back of a cabinet, I found Rusty's old rubber ball, faint with the smell of worn plastic. I sat on the rug and rolled it slowly toward her. Shadow's eyes locked on at once. At first, just a stare, no movement. But when the ball hit the wall and rolled back near her, she nudged a paw forward, clumsy and unsure. The ball rolled away again, and my heart nearly burst from my chest. I rolled it once more, farther this time. Shadow followed it with her eyes, then, hesitant, trembling, rose to her feet and took a few tiny steps. Her thin tail gave a faint twitch, not quite a wag, more like a punctuation mark. But to me, it was a miracle. I laughed, a sound I hadn't made in months. "That's it, Shadow!" I knew you were in there. The next day, something else changed. While I was cleaning the kitchen, I felt soft footsteps behind me. Shadow, still cautious but moving now in my shadow. When I stopped, she stopped too, ears drooping, eyes lifted. When I moved again, she followed, slow but steady, as if some invisible thread had begun tying us together. That night, I sat down on the sofa with a book in hand. Shadow no longer claimed the corner. She crept closer, curled herself right at my feet, a small bundle of black and tan fur. Before long, her breathing deepened, soft and even like the wind through the trees outside. I bent down and let my hand rest against her back. This time she didn't flinch. She only exhaled, long and steady, as if letting go of one more piece of fear. "Sleep, Shadow," I whispered, my throat tightening. "You're home now." In that room, only the hiss of wind through the doorframe remained, and the soft breathing of a small life, learning, maybe for the first time, how to trust. I knew the road ahead would still be long, but we had taken the first steps, small ones. Yet each step was a miracle. A week after Shadow took her first bite of food and dared to press the ball against my shoe, I knew it was time for the next step. She couldn't hide forever within four walls. She needed to learn that the world outside wasn't only fear. but even the thought of it unsettled me. I didn't want to force her. I didn't want to shatter the fragile trust we had just begun to build. That morning, I pulled out a black leash that once belonged to Rusty. The moment Shadow saw it, she backed away, ears flat, body stiff as stone. I knelt, set the leash on the floor, letting her sniff. "It's all right, Shadow," I whispered, palm open, patient. It took nearly 10 minutes before she edged forward, gave it a cautious sniff, and turned away. I didn't try to slip it on. Instead, day after day, I left the leash on the floor, nothing more than an object, harmless in her world. By the third day, I clipped it gently to her small collar. Shadow froze, eyes wide, panic shimmering in their brown depths. I sat down beside her, not pulling, letting the leash hang loose. I told her stories in an even tone, words that didn't matter, voice steady so she knew I was there. After a few minutes, I unclipped it and brushed her back with my hand. Everything had to be slow, as if soothing a child roused too often by nightmares. Finally, on a quiet morning, I opened the front door. The cool breath of early spring drifted in, carrying damp earth and pine sap. Shadow stood in the doorway, paws rooted to the floor. I stepped outside first, leash slack in my hand. "Come on, girl," I said softly. She didn't move. I sat on the porch step and waited. At last, one small paw lifted, then another, shaky, hesitant, but forward. Her first steps into open air after months of nothing but bars and shadows. We walked slowly down the narrow street that led toward the square. A passing car made Shadow flinch, body taut as a bowstring. Each horn, each slamming door, sent her retreating to press against my leg. I stopped, crouched low, resting my hand on her back. "It's all right, Shadow. You're safe." I said it again and again, a refrain she could lean on. I didn't tug. I didn't push. I simply waited, letting her breath steady. People began to notice. A woman leading her child whispered, "Isn't that the Saddest dog from the shelter?" I heard, but I didn't answer. I only looked down at Shadow, saw fear still bright in her eyes, but also something else, curiosity. She was trying, and every second she tried was its own victory. That first day, we made it only a few hundred yards, the second a little farther. By the fifth, Shadow walked alongside me, no longer pressed against my leg. Her tail twitched, not much, but enough to call it a wag. Right there on the street, I nearly broke down. That afternoon, I took her to the small park in downtown Asheville. Children shouted and chased each other, balloons bobbing in the wind, laughter filling the air. Shadow froze, eyes wide, body trembling. I knelt and touched her head gently. "I'm here. Just stay beside me." We sat under a great maple tree, watching the children play. It took a long while, but eventually Shadow sank at my feet. Her ears still flicked at every sound, but the wild panic was gone. That night, when we returned home, Shadow didn't vanish into the corner. She stepped into the living room, settled beneath the sofa, her tail brushing the floor when I spoke her name. I stroked her back, felt her breathing steadier than before, and for the first time, I heard a deep sigh escape her chest, as if she was learning how to let her heart loosen. I leaned back on the sofa, eyes on that fragile life drifting into sleep. From a silent shadow in the darkest corner of the shelter, Shadow had walked into the open air, had heard the noise of cars, and had watched the world. The road ahead would be long. But we had crossed the hardest threshold, the threshold of trust. A month had passed since I first took Shadow to the park. Each trembling breath, each hesitant step, had slowly woven itself into a bond. She was no longer the creature curled into the dark. Each morning, when I opened my eyes, I found her ears pricked at the foot of the bed, her thin tail swishing softly in greeting. I began to believe we were settling into a new rhythm, quiet, safe, even if still fragile. But fate has a way of testing us when we least expect it. That evening, I invited my sister for dinner. Emily brought her 6-year-old son, Jacob, my only nephew. The red brick house pulsed with a liveliness it hadn't known in months. The clatter of silverware, the smell of roasted chicken drifting from the oven, and Jacob's laughter echoed as he darted around the living room. Shadow stretched out on the rug, eyes half closed, tail flicking lightly each time the boy ran past. Watching that, I exhaled in relief. I had worried she might panic around strangers, but instead she seemed calm, as though she too was savoring the warmth of family. For a moment, I let myself believe the worst was behind us. Dinner ended. Emily cleared the table while I carried out dessert. Jacob rolled Rusty's old rubber ball across the floor, giggling as it bounced off furniture. I remember turning away for just a second. Then, the soft click of the back door. When I looked up, my chest seized. Jacob had slipped onto the porch, chasing the ball as it rolled into the grass, toward the road where cars always sped too fast. "Jacob!" I shouted, dropping the tray of pie. I lunged forward, but before I could move more than a step, the roar of an engine split the air. A gray sedan barreled down the street, tires screaming against wet pavement, headlights cutting straight into the small figure bent to pick up the ball. Time shattered into fragments. I knew I wouldn't make it. My heart exploded against my ribs. And then, a streak of black and tan tore across my vision. Shadow. She launched from the rug, arrow fast, streaking off the porch. In a heartbeat, she slammed into Jacob, knocking him sideways into the grass. The car screamed past, wind whipping, tires shrieking. The world froze on its axis. Jacob lay on the ground, eyes wide, the ball tumbling from his hand. Over him stood Shadow, tiny body trembling, but eyes fierce, paws dug into the earth, braced against whatever danger dared return. I fell to my knees beside them, clutching Jacob, then wrapping my arms around Shadow too. "Oh God, Shadow, you saved him," I choked. Her body quaked, her heart racing against my palm, yet she held her stance, refusing to move until I was there to take her place. Emily burst through the door, calling her son's name, voice breaking. When she saw Jacob safe in my arms, she collapsed, sobbing, clutching both of us at once. "If it hadn't been for Shadow—" Her words dissolved into tears, her red-rimmed eyes locked on the trembling puppy who had just saved her child. I looked down at Shadow, my vision blurred with tears. This was the same dog once called the saddest puppy in the shelter. The one abandoned to the dark corner, forgotten, frozen in fear. And now, when it mattered most, she had thrown herself into danger without hesitation, to shield a boy she barely knew. That night, the red brick house felt different. Emily held Jacob close, still shaken. I sat on the floor, hand resting gently on Shadow's back. She was exhausted, her breath ragged, yet in her eyes flickered something new. Not just fear, not just sorrow, but light. Strong, defiant, proud. My voice rasped as I whispered, "You're not the saddest dog anymore, Shadow. You're this family's hero, and I knew from that moment forward neither of our lives would ever be the same." The next morning, before I could even make coffee, a knock sounded at the door. My neighbor stood there, holding a loaf of bread still warm, eyes shining. "I heard about last night. My God, Aaron, Did that little dog really save Jacob? I nodded. My throat tightened as the image replayed. Shadow's small body hurling into the road, standing between a child and death. My neighbor's eyes welled. Unbelievable. The dog they called the saddest in the shelter is now a hero. Word spread faster than I imagined. That afternoon, as I walked Shadow around the block, whispers followed us. That's her. The one who saved the boy. Children pointed, wide-eyed, while adults bent down to stroke her head with reverence. Shadow was still thin, her coat not yet sleek, but her tail wagged with new strength. She no longer shrank back at the sight of strangers. Instead, she lifted her head, her gaze still cautious, but brightened now with trust. Just days later, a local reporter called. They wanted to write about Shadow. I hesitated, afraid that too much attention might send her retreating into fear. But then I thought, if Shadow's story could inspire someone to adopt another dog clinging to life in a shelter, wasn't that worth it? The article ran with the headline, From the Saddest Dog in the Shelter to a Hero. The photo showed Shadow sitting beside Jacob in the grass, filling the front page. Then, like a tide, letters and emails poured in. People wrote about their own abandoned dogs. Others said her story convinced them to give an animal another chance. I read each one and realized Shadow hadn't just saved Jacob. She was saving countless hearts. A week later, I got a call from Maya, the shelter director. Her voice carried an excitement I'd never heard. Aaron, someone wants to meet Shadow. A retired K-9 officer. He said her build and her eyes remind him of the line he worked with. I brought Shadow back to the shelter, the place where it all began. As we walked in, the staff who once called her the saddest dog froze. They couldn't believe their eyes. The little Doberman stepping confidently now, tail wagging hard when she spotted Maya. Maya bent down, stroked her back, whispering, It's like she's a completely different dog. In the waiting room, an older man in a worn police uniform rose. His hair was white, his shoulders marked by years of service. When his eyes met Shadow's, his lips trembled. I know this look, he murmured, then knelt, hand shaking as he reached forward. Shadow hesitated, then stepped closer, sniffed. In a heartbeat, her head tilted, ears pricked, as if some distant memory stirred awake. I saw recognition mirrored in both their eyes. The old man looked at me. I trained K-9s here in Asheville. I'd bet my life Shadow comes from a working line. Her parents were likely service dogs, loyal, fearless, born to protect. I was struck silent. Suddenly, everything aligned. Her sharp reflexes, the way her eyes constantly scanned, and above all, the instant she'd thrown herself in front of that car for Jacob. It hadn't been blind instinct. It was a legacy. It was blood. Maya's voice broke. We thought she was broken. Beyond repair. But she's the daughter of heroes. I knelt, wrapping my arms around Shadow, tears spilling freely. So that's who you are, Shadow. Not just abandoned. You carry the blood of guardians. On the drive home, Shadow sat tall in the back seat, ears high, head lifted. In the rearview mirror, I saw her eyes, no longer clouded by fear, but clear, calm, resolute. I spoke softly, voice raw but warm. Now I understand. You weren't born to hide. You were born to protect. And from the moment we met, I knew why fate placed you in my hands. The car rolled beneath golden maples, wind scattering leaves across the road. In the back seat, Shadow let out a long sigh and rested her head on my leg. And I knew the truth revealed that day wouldn't just change how people saw her. It would change forever how I saw my own life. That day, the small town of Asheville seemed louder than ever. I drove Shadow to City Hall, where flags snapped in the wind and rows of wooden chairs inside were already packed. Neighbors, friends, even strangers filled the room. All had come to see the dog once called the saddest in the shelter. When I led Shadow in, every gaze turned toward us. Whispers rippled. "That's her, the dog who saved the boy." Children waved. Adults rose to their feet and clapped. Shadow froze for a moment, ears folding back at the noise. I bent low, hand on her back. "It's all right, boy. I'm here." As if it were habit now, she exhaled deeply, then moved forward. The mayor stepped to the podium, holding a framed certificate. His voice carried through the hall. "Today, we honor a hero. Not in uniform, not with medals, but this small dog did something none of us will ever forget. She saved a child, protected a family, and reminded an entire community of hope." Applause erupted, crashing like waves. I looked down to see Shadow sitting tall at my feet, her brown eyes lit as though she understood every word. In that moment, I remembered the first day I saw her, a shadow in the corner, eyes hollow, hope gone. And now, she lifted her head before hundreds, called by a name no one had ever imagined for her. Hero. When the mayor lowered the frame, Shadow tilted her head, then lifted one small paw and placed it in his hand. The hall fell silent for a heartbeat. Then it burst open with tears and cheers. Many wept openly. So did I. My tears weren't only pride. They came because I understood. This was bigger than us both. After the ceremony, children swarmed around Shadow. I once feared she would recoil, shrink from laughter and strange hands. But she stayed calm, ears perked, eyes gentle, letting each tiny hug pass across her back. One boy looked up at me, eyes shining. "Sir, I want to adopt a sad dog too, so I can make him a hero like Shadow." The words caught in my chest. That was what I hoped, that her story would reach further than any certificate ever could. That night, when the crowds had gone, I sat on the porch of the red brick house. A thin crescent moon slipped above the trees. Shadow lay beside me, head on my lap like a child at rest. I ran my hand down her back, listening to her warm, steady breaths. "You know, Shadow," I whispered, my voice breaking, "you didn't just save Jacob. You saved me." After losing Rusty, I thought my heart was sealed forever. I thought I'd spend the rest of my life in an empty house. But you filled it, with loyalty, with courage, with a wordless love nothing else could replace. Shadow lifted her gaze to me. No trace of fear remained, only a quiet light, clear and steady. In those eyes I saw the truth at last. She had never been the saddest dog. She had only been waiting for someone to see her worth. I bent closer, whispering, "You are my destiny." Outside, the night wind swept through the pines, carrying the earth's own whisper. And I knew Shadow's story would no longer be ours alone. It would stand as a reminder to anyone who had ever overlooked a broken soul. Never underestimate a heart that has been shattered. Because from those cracks, sometimes, rises a hero. If Shadow's story moved your heart, please pause for just a second. Like, share, and subscribe. Somewhere out there, countless dogs still tremble in the dark, waiting for a hand to reach out. Every share you make could be the lifeline for another forgotten life. Tell us, have you ever saved a dog or any animal? Leave your story in the comments. Perhaps your story will be the spark that rekindles someone else's hope. Together, we can spread compassion. Together, we can turn abandoned hearts into silent heroes.